Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this evening with Rachel Gracey in conversation with Alice Irwin. Thank you so much to those two. It was really kind to do this. And I think by way of introduction, I'm just going to sort of read a little bit, just give you a synopsis of Rachel Gracey and her work, and then Alice as well, just to lay the scene. We've got currently a show on at the moment called Things Have to Keep Moving, which is the prints and a maquette and a sculpture piece from Alice Irwin, and it's on until the 27th of September. I'll probably repeat that in a minute, but just so if you can get down to the show in Woodstock, it'd be lovely to see you there. So without further ado, Rachel Gracey grew up in Surrey and now lives and works in Oxford. Her formative education in fine art was first at Epsom and then Bristol, and later she read a postgraduate and a master's in printmaking at Wimbledon, where she won the Michael Putman Prize. For 12 years, while she lived in London, she was part of the avant-garde Artichoke Print Workshop in Brixton, where she assembled an innovative and varied portfolio. She has won several prizes and exhibited at various public institutions and galleries, most notably the Royal Academy, the Barbican, Bankside, Rebecca Hossack and the Groucho Club, and the Mall Galleries. Her work is also in prestigious collections such as the British Museum, the Fitzwilliam, Ashmolean, Galan Printmaking Museum in China. I hope I've said that right, Rachel. You can correct me later. The Royal Collection and the Imperial Health Charity. Rachel has taken inspiration from sculptors throughout her career and was especially influenced by seeing Alexander Calder's mobile at the Guggenheim and mobiles of his at Burlington Gardens. She is famed for her ability to embrace negative space and to make it as important to the interplay of shapes and colours as of the subject itself. In recognition of her achievements, she was elected an RE in 2019 by the Royal Society of Painter Printmakers, and this year was the winner of the Pressing Matters magazine prize in Cambridge. Alice is an exciting young artist from London and is already exhibited widely in the UK, including Bankside, Peace Hall in Halifax, and the Yorkshire Sculpture Park. She has won prizes in both sculpture and printmaking, including the Contemporary Art Trust Prize, and has been awarded several artists in residencies. She has a master's in printmaking from the Royal College of Art and has previously received funding from the Arts Council. Currently, Alice has a large sculpture, Streaky Dance, at the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, and we have her exhibition, Things Have to Keep Moving, as mentioned, in our Woodstock Gallery until the 27th of September. Having dyslexia, Alice experiences life quite differently, and her memories and observations are channeled into colourful characters and motifs, creating a unique visual language. The bright colours are often loud and playful, leaving us both intrigued and absorbed into her world. Her art seems to float through our subconscious in a musical mark-making symphony. Following the show here at Zuleika, Alice has been selected to have a solo exhibition at the refurbished Pitzhanger Manor Gallery in London in January. So thank you very, very much. And I'd like to hand over now to Rachel and Alice and listen to in conversation between them.
Thank you. Thanks, Phil, ever so much. And thank you, Zuleika Gallery, for inviting the pair of us to have a conversation about our work. It's really lovely of you to set this up. Thank you. Should we have the first slide? Here are our two titles for the most recent series we've done, Things Have to Keep Moving and River Notes. Alice, do you want to kick us off and just say how you came about that title and how it links to the image that we see here?
Yeah, so here we're talking about titles. Titles are really important in my work. The title kind of is usually quite playful because I want you to not take the title too seriously. So this one is called Keep Moving, and it's a recent series that I completed. It's a series of 9. And the series is about kind of how we're all caught up in this busy world, in this busy life, but we're still having to keep moving. So yeah, the title's called Keep Moving, to play on that series. And then do you want to talk about the title Up at Sunnymead?
Yeah, sure. I mean, thank you. Yeah, this series I called River Notes, and it was a series of work drawn and printed between 2020 and 2022. So over a season, the COVID season in a way, but a time when I was just watching and looking, and particularly at rivers, and seeing an awful lot of change, not only in the water and landscape, but in people too. And so my observations in my sketchbooks, I was just pulled them together, almost like written notes, drawn notes, but also almost musical notes. And I kind of just stole that sort of river notes phrase and liked how it could kind of cover up the series that I've done, that you'll see images from. So here it was just up at Sunnymead, very locally, and this is kind of tells the story really of the magic, the calm, the music, sometimes in landscape, particularly when water's involved, and these sort of playful colours. This was a kind of much more positive moment in the couple of years that we've had. So yeah, our two.
So I've noticed that a lot of your titles, are they titles of the places that you've got inspired by? Because I've noticed all of your titles are usually like names, and then in brackets they have like Cherwell or Chicago, or I don't know, they've all got different bracket. They all have a bracket, like quite a few of them have the title bracket something.
Yeah, I think this comes from just sort of, yes, logging, particularly for this series, logging the river where these images were sourced from. So this is the Cherwell River, and there's a series, Cherwell, but each one has a little spot. So yeah, everything I do has a place where it's begun, you know, and then gets pulled apart. Let's move on to the next slide. And in a way, I think it'd be really good to discuss where our ideas come from and how they progress, you know. So here we've got something that began in 2018. Were these images from your masters, was that right? Or is this something that was pulled on later on?
Yeah, so this was a big series that I made in my masters. I mean, it was like a series of maybe 30. Like the screen prints was probably a series of 30, and the etchings probably a series of 20. So yeah, it was a series made in my masters where I was really just starting to kind of develop my language, because as you can see, quite a lot of the forms in these series compared to the ones now are a lot more like refined, they're a lot less abstracted. And in the screen print series, you can see the difference of etching. So I took some of the etching, part of the etching, blew it up, and then started to screen print with it to like cross over those different processes. And I was really just trying to work out this new different language that I was working with, because before I started this visual language, I was very into faces and just did faces. So in quite a few of the works, you'll see there's reference of eyes, because I'm really interested in the eye. And I think more and more as time goes on, this eye has got a lot more abstracted. But whereas, because this is more of a like an earlier print, the etching ones, you can see the eyes are very detailed. And the eyes, when they're in the works, they never look at the audience. They always look like up away from the print. It's almost like the figure is not present with you. And I do that because I want that idea of you kind of taking yourself away being in the print but taking yourself away at the same time. So you're like present but not present, just how the figure's present but also somewhere else, to get you kind of starting to play with your imagination.
Lovely. Yes, and I can see definitely that sort of, and the progression of, you speak about evolution of form and ideas, and how silkscreen has definitely brought about a different dimension. Do you want to talk about what silkscreen has offered your images and moved you forward? And from the most recent work, you kept that silkscreen.
Yeah. So I think for me, like etching and screen print are the predominantly like the two print mediums I work with. Recently I've got more into screen printing, because for me at the moment of time, screen print is a lot more of an immediate process, and you can kind of, you don't have, where like etching you have a sheet of metal, you have quite a few restraints, you have to kind of be quite in the outcome, you can get free results, but in the process it's very kind of restricting, and you have to follow this process very strictly, otherwise nothing's going to work. You could put it in the acid and nothing will come out. You have to, everything's very like tight. Whereas for me at the moment, screen printing, you can kind of get something from an etching and put it on. You can cut out a bit of paper, expose that and put it on. It's a very fast and energetic process, which for me at the moment I'm really enjoying, because I'm quite a prolific maker, and the speed I need to make, it can kind of keep up with me in a way. And I also find as well, I can explore more with color. I mean, you can explore a lot with etching, you can explore a lot with color as well, but when you etch, it has this certain like tone to the color. It doesn't necessarily, and especially because, like, I mean, if you use steel when you etch, the color you can get is very vibrant, but then again the process to get the final outcome is even slower, because steel takes hours to etch, whereas like etching is a bit more fast, but the colors are always slightly more like numbed. And I feel like I am gonna again go back and explore etching. I feel like kind of I'm getting to that point again where I want to go and explore more of etching again. But for me, like through the past kind of couple of years, etching's taken more of a back burner because of needing this energy, needing to explore, express, and develop.
Yeah, should we move to the next slide? I can absolutely see, and then moving on to Sweet as Candy, you can just see how it really has worked for you in terms of that building up of more, and different ideas, whereas etching has a waiting time and a slower laying. Whereas if you are wanting more information put on, you've used it very well for that kind of piling up and kind of really putting in all the different thoughts and ideas you want into the image, and like you say, it keeps that vibrancy of color, which is really striking in what you do.
So I always find, talking about this like speed and energy, with your prints, because they're lithographs, and I know lithograph is quite a time-consuming process, but still you create this energy, and almost like it felt like it's been created in speed. But lithography is not it's not fast.
No, it isn't. It's funny. I think I would love it to be faster in a way, but because I'm working on several at the same time, it's not like I'm sitting waiting for something to dry. I'll move to different images. But what does happen, what I love, why I've chosen lithography of the various mediums of printing, is the immediacy you have with the plate. So you actually draw and paint and make marks, and they are actually printed, and that it's the how it's done is what attracts me funnily to lithography, and but again, similarly, I've loved etching in the past. I do enjoy woodcut. I've tried silkscreen. Printmaking is a very magical thing, isn't it? You know, for putting.
Yeah, and I think so. And I think how you were just saying, drawing on the plate and stuff. I think through all the types of printmaking, they all have a very different physical process. Like with lithography, you can very much. It's almost like you use the litho plate as your sketchbook, and you just draw on it, and then you put it through the press. Screen printing, like you can use different imagery to expose that, you know, again is a physical process. And etching, you kind of have this metal plate that you draw on and put it through the acid. So I think like the one thing that's, you know, all of these different print processes all have like a magical spark, and all are very, very different from each other. But I think like the one thing that brings them all together is there all is a physical element to them, whether that is, well, it's all every kind of printmaking is literally physical, but it all has a unique different physicality.
Yeah, yes, and we make them our own. You know, that's what's lovely about when you look at various printmakers. You know, everyone makes that process their own, and their own images, and pushes things from the drawings we've done. Let's move on, and I'd quite like to talk a bit more about colour that we've just sort of launched on. Seeing these two, Sweet as Candy again and Homebound, how do you go about choosing colour? Do you draw in colour at first, or is it more drawing with line and then the silkscreen creates the colours, as it were, layering?
So I always draw in black and white. I used to only work in black and white, and then I got absolutely eradicated it, and it's recently I've started to integrate black and white back into my work. But I always start drawing with black in, usually like just with a pencil or a crayon, and those drawings will come from like my imagination or things I'm thinking about, and then from the drawing I'll then start to think about the color. Sometimes the color doesn't come until I just randomly mix it up, and then I'm just like, okay, this is the color I'm working with, and then if I don't like it, you go back to the drawing board and screen print and print over it. Or sometimes I have in my head, I've seen like a specific color that I really want. Or sometimes, you know, I'll create a tone, the like mood of the print will then create the tone of the color. So like sometimes I think I'm naturally more drawn to brighter, bolder colors, but I do try to integrate more like softer. And that is another thing that I'm wanting to start using, to like more pastel colors. I use orange, pink, and blues. We were having this conversation how Rachel uses a lot of green, and I just don't know how to work with green. Every time I use it, I just can't understand the color. But like, I'm wanting to start to integrate more colors. Usually different colors integrate in my work through layering up the pinks, the blues, and the oranges, and then you get different tones like purple, gold. But I'm wanting to maybe start to like physically bring more color. How to do that is to be continued.
Yes, you have to be quite bold, don't you? I know we all have kind of nemesis colors. I'm not great with purple. I have a real block, and I try, and I always think those ones are less. Oh, well, a few more end up in the bin with that sort of color. But color is quite. It's something to be quite daring with. Yesterday, I went to Rama Begum's lecture, and she was talking about color in her sculptures and her installations, and she was saying color for her is all about an experience and being immersed in color. And I was wondering if you too, you know, because some of your prints are very, very large, and you have great enjoyment, and I wondered whether you could kind of identify with that expression of an experience of color.
Yeah, I think like color, you can, well, I think color can bring joy, but it also can like appear kind of less joyful. You can, with color, also create a very like psychedelic, intense, stressful moment. And I think like the thing that I love about color is that through like this energy, you can create these different experiences. And you can create a very joyful environment. Sometimes I even think that even through my own work with color, you can maybe create a too intense environment because of how powerful color can be. It's a very like dominating thing. And I think that's the thing that I really enjoy about it, is that you can create so many different environments through like just the color, whether you can create more like a more softer with like tone of color, you can create something more softer, or you know, with richer colors, maybe that's something a bit more brighter, and then you get more vibrant, you can get more something that's a bit more kind of intense in the environment. I think it's just how you get this very like, it's just so playful. And I think one of the things that's really crucial to my work and my practice is keeping it playful. And I find, I mean, I think you can still be playful with monochrome. That's why I think I've started to want to integrate it again. Because I think, you know, you can create all these things with monochrome just as you can with color. But I think they both talk differently. And I think that's what, you know, for me, color is always going to be the thing for me. But I think as well, there is a beauty with monochrome. And I think now for me at this moment in time is like working out what these two, like color and monochrome, what is it I want from both of them? What is it that like I get most captured by from both of them?
And you were saying something. Should we have the next slide? You're talking a little bit about how color can provoke a memory and provoke thought. And I was thinking similarly with what I do. These two, for example, Racing Pink down at Helford River. There is such density and darkness of these hedgerows and bankside. You know, they're really high riverbanks. And there was this really vibrant, surging mud riverbed, but it felt so pink as I was looking, in contrast to this, the dark and the green. And I really just wanted to bring that out, you know, just kind of like pop a bit of the pink to kind of resonate with someone, with a memory, with something that people maybe take for granted, of just mud slats. And then this great Mill Pond Mead, it's that last gasp of autumn. And rather than create that kind of woody brown with a touch flashes of orange, you know, just to kind of bring in the chill, something of the chill of winter, to highlight the kind of the remains of something quite stunning. And it's just playing, isn't it? Playing with color to find a voice.
And I think the right one of the Great Mill Pond Mead, that's quite a good example of how you kind of almost use like tones of white, then you've brought in the strips of color to have like a more kind of calmer, but then the color brings in that little bits of color, bring in that like intensity as well.
It's an impossible task, isn't it, playing with color, but it's also so very, very exciting, really something lovely. Let's move on to our next thing. We both love working with layers, don't we? And here we have model 1, model 2. Tell us again with how the process of silkscreen, how it can create for you what you're after of complexity and of life.
So I think, like we were just saying, we both use a lot of layers. I use layering as a way of physically layer. I use it for many different reasons why I use layering. I use layering because it's a very physical process, and it's a very literal way of building up a work. And through literally building up the work, you can create kind of these. It makes different layers that you have to unravel. But I also use layering because it is a metaphor of how we as people are very complex people, and we're all built up of many layers. And I think kind of using the way I work, I try to use it as the metaphor of how we're built up of very many layers. You have to work through these layers of the work to kind of understand it. You have to give the work time. The work with more layers, you certainly need to stand in front of it and really give it a sense of time. You start to unravel these different shapes, start to kind of jump out at you. But I also like that as a way of kind of associating it to how we as humans are very complex people, and we're built up of many layers. And you have to give time to people to start to unravel and understand their personalities. But the work, the layers I usually try to keep it very playful, because of, again, this metaphor of how we all, as you get older and you kind of work through the layers of life, we kind of forget these moments of play, and how it's really important to tap back into your childhood. It's really important to sometimes take that step back, taking a step back from the work, taking that step back and actually giving yourself some time to kind of play and not get caught up in these in the seriousness of life that it can be. So I think and these works muddled is really echoing that, because I made these works at the end of when we were going through lockdown, and like everyone, I think everyone found lockdown a very hard, isolating time. And I also think, I don't know, but I found as an artist, I spent a lot of time by myself. And I mean, in the studio, I like to work in silence. I like to have minimal distractions. I like to just kind of be with my own ideas. But I think, alongside that, if you're also spending more time by yourself and then it feeling a very strange time, you start to feel quite muddled, and you try to work. There's loads of things that you start to overthink and start to try to understand where in day-to-day life, because you're so busy, you don't start to think about these things. So I called this work muddled, because it was I was trying to work out things that I'd been thinking about through this kind of isolating COVID time.
Yeah, no, and I think that's where silkscreen is terrific, with the stenciling, and the repeated stenciling and the changing and the placing very specifically, placing where each shape stencil will be for each of these different images. And you can see them in Zuleika Gallery on the wall, and how they interrelate with each other, and how you've obviously been working on them as a series. And
yeah,
that's
and
why
I think
the gallery is so good.
Yeah, and I think also talking the thing, I don't print like a normal. So when you silk screen, you have a big bed, and you have a big arm, and the silk screen usually locks into it. But I don't use that. I just use the screen physically and put it straight on top of the paper. So when you can see actually in these works that some of the shapes aren't quite perfect, because with screen printing you can create very graphic pop color, but not using the frame allows you for accidental mistakes, and how you were saying, you can very physically move the stencils. It gives you a lot more freedom not using it in the frame, and you can then kind of, again, and with not using it in the frame, you get these accidental mistakes, which I really like because it kind of shows the hand process.
And that's very true to you, you know, liking, you know, just doing one-offs and enjoying what's happened here, and the you know, the surprise element, whereas some like to exactly know what's going on. The one on the left here, the Thames 5, I guess for me layering is, it's really, I love, again, printmaking is all about one layer, next layer, and very kind of, again, thinking possibly three-dimensionally. But I love the way that layers can really affect colors with each other. Layers can kind of really portray darker times.
Yeah, so I think sometimes you can obviously see in the work through the layers that I'm physically trying to work something out. Because some of the prints, there's a lot less layering. There'll be about 5 layers. And then some of the prints will go up to like 40 or 50 layers. And I think that's a very physical way of me literally trying to work out what's the print. Sometimes that doesn't always mean it. Sometimes I do just want to create a really dense work that kind of, through this layering, creates all this different color and shapes. But then sometimes I will just like layer and layer and layer, because it's like me physically trying to like get to the end of the work, if that makes sense. Like I'm trying to work this work like, and then there's more, sometimes this work, for instance, is an example of the monochrome, me bringing back in the monochrome. And these is only two layers, because I had the negatives were very dense already, so I wanted to keep the layering quite simple. And yeah, and it's also kind of a lot more whiter space, letting the white space do the talking rather than the layers doing the talking. And I think that's what I kind of play with as well, is that way that how, you know, the blank space can be really, really important, but then sometimes it's really interesting when you try to eradicate that, and how you kind of, through just layering, you get rid of the white space, and what environment that can create.
No, it is. It's very, very powerful, isn't it, when you start really stripping back to work monochrome.
Alice, we're talking about shadows and shapes and things. Would you like to talk to us a little bit about these two works?
Yeah. So you'll notice, regarding shape, you'll notice that in a lot of my works I have repeating shapes, because I have like, I keep building, I have like this visual language that I keep building, and I guess I use it slightly like an alphabet. So like I have these different shapes that for me, and I think as well that references me being dyslexic, is that like I've created my own alphabet that I use to like visually communicate through with these different shapes. So for instance, one of the shapes that I use a lot, and you see in pretty much every single work, is this 3 like fingered shape. It for me, it's come from this idea of how I am really interested in like us as humans, our physicality, and it's like referencing the human hand, but it also doesn't have that like in lots of the works with how I use it, it doesn't really reference a hand, and I do that on purpose to create for you to try and keep questioning, keep your imagination going. So sometimes it might appear as a balloon, or it might appear as a head, or just appear as a shape, and I do that to kind of keep your imagination going and keep questioning the works. Another one that I use a lot as well is like lots of triangles and a lot of circles and squares. Again, they're very like primitive shapes. To kind of, I like to kind of keep some of the shapes quite basic. I've recently, and they are constantly developing, and even more recently became more dominant, is like figures. I created, so the figures again are influenced from the game Snakes and Ladders. I'm really interested in the game Snakes and Ladders because it was used in ancient times as a fortune teller, and the snakes were seen as demons and the ladders were seen as like climbing up to success. And the image on the right, the figures are really referencing the idea of like ladder and snakes. How the one that's lying down is kind of like roughly like an abstracted ladder, but they're also all quite like there's lots of like movement in the shapes to reference like the snakes. And as time's gone on, these figures are getting less kind of what's the word, less kind of basic and becoming more figurative, still following this process of like this snaky shape, this ladder, and also another thing that really inspires for the figures is the game Jigsaw, and how they're kind of, you can see on the bottom right, it almost looks like a piece, the figure looks like a jigsaw piece. And they're using the idea of the game Jigsaw is like how you have loads of pieces of the jigsaw building together to create one piece, but there's a certain way of putting it together. And I really like that idea, kind of trying to find this way of how to put things together. There is a way to put it together, but you've got to like work it out.
Go to the next slide and actually see, because this is what we'd really love to see, is the how things become three-dimensional. Just tell us about this little one.
So this is a maquette for some works that I did whilst I was at the RCA, and it's made up of 6 layers of perspex. And this is when I was really trying to physically work out how, so a lot of the sculptures are kind of shapes, figures and form that's been within my prints and within my drawing, and kind of bringing them out into the 4D. And these ones were kind of quite literally layering up to create something that's 3D. So it's almost as if when I was making this, I was trying to think of like making as if you were like layering up each plate of an etching plate or a print plate to create a sculpture. And then I also like engraved in the sculptures to kind of echo the idea of engraving, the like type of printmaking. And it was a very like physical, literal way of me trying to work out how I was wanting to go into sculpture. And I think as well, like printmaking and sculpture kind of, they do kind of all go hand in hand. They're very like process driven. And I was really, this work was just really trying to physically work out how I was going to start to bring this form for me into the 4D.
The 3D, brilliant. And so now we've got an image, the next slide, of what you've just recently done. And again, so not acrylic now, this is metal, isn't it? Tell us about this one.
Yeah, so this one's called Balance. It is a steel sculpture. So since I had a solo show at the Peace Hall, and that was my first public commission, and since then I've been working in steel for my sculptures. It's a very kind of industrial, durable material, and this one is called Balance because it's like when you see it, it balances and it rocks, and it's the idea of like it's like a balancing act. But this is not so much physically layering up. It's more as well, it's kind of almost echoing like you could physically pick it up, play with it, print it, use it. It's like feeling like more of an object. A lot of the works, the sculptural works, they do have this 2D, 3D element, kind of pushing and pulling that idea of bringing the drawings that I've had kind of bringing them out.
Now you
It's
mentioned
like
something about at the Peace Hall. You did an installation in their courtyard in Halifax. Was this an image for it, or is this an image from your installation of people?
No, so I think it is a good example of how the figures have progressed in my work, because the figures in the Peace Hall are very much echoing the idea of this like snakes and ladders. They're all quite simple and primitive. I think this is a good example of how the figures in my works are still quite primitive, but they're not so simplistic. They start to have more movement in them. They've got more personality. One thing that's quite important is that lots of figures, they like don't have an identity. They're not neither female or male, and I do that on purpose to kind of make you decide, like you kind of take control and just start to unread the works. But saying that, Streaky Dance, which is my most recent public art sculpture that is now at the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, it was looking more at the female form, still in a kind of way that's not shouting out, hey, I'm female, but looking more at the female form. And I was really starting to think, I've been thinking a lot how me as a woman and everyone, like women, how we all get, there's this like big issue about how we feel in our like personal physique, and how really we should just be all our bodies are different. We've all got curves in different ways. Some of us have more curves than other. It's like we are all uniquely different, which is a beautiful thing. And so this sculpture's like, it's called Streaky Dance because it's also like the sculpture's stopped in a moment of dancing, and it's like the idea of celebrating about who we are, our bodies, feeling like powerful about ourselves, and not really caring what other think. We shouldn't care what other people think. And this sculptures, again, it's in like a relaxed pose to try and like echo the idea that you don't need to worry about stuff, because I know I'm one person that's a big worrier. So it's kind of like that idea as well to like stop the worrying, let's take a moment and just kind of enjoy who we are. It doesn't matter, if you've got a curve here or whatever. It's, we've got to celebrate who we are.
There's a really lovely photo of you leaning on her, and on maybe your Instagram, Zuleika Instagram, and I love that because actually it's a huge sculpture, and you just look so safe and comfy and happy in that that curved hip of the sculpture. And I really love that picture because it's thick as well, isn't it? It's quite deep. And it relates very much to those prints that we've just seen, where there's a couple of people leaning on each other. And
I think one thing I just wanted to point out about the sculptures is a lot of the sculptures, they have like the shape on their faces, and it's like acting like a mask. Because one thing that I haven't talked about, which is masks, and a lot of the figures that I draw within the works have like that shape as their face, to represent this idea of masks and how we all kind of hide behind a mask, and it's the idea of like unraveling the person.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Alice. We probably need to stop and have questions now, but no, it's lovely to see that. And you've got something coming up at the Pitts Hanger. Have we got sculptures for that to show at the Pitts Hanger?
So it's going to be in the Pitts Hanger. It's in the Pitts Hanger. It's going mixture of print, drawings, and sculptures. I haven't shown any drawings before, so I'm quite excited to station drawings, and yeah, it'll be print sculptures and prints.
Great.
Thank you so much. I can't say thank you so much to Rachel Gracey and Alice Irwin. I know we've got some time for questions. Alice, you mentioned about obviously your you know, play and having fun with your work as well, and obviously memories and, you know, all of those things. I think from my point of view as well, when I look at your work, I also think that a lot of your figures are not, you know, they're not human necessarily. And I sort of see a lot of, and I think you know, I always get this feeling that you love animals as well. And I don't know why, because I see sometimes you have these motifs that come out, you know, like the frog and, you know, and sort of almost like a paw-like feel. I'm just thinking, do you do love animals, or is it just part of the whole, when you're thinking about your work spontaneously as they come through, you know, things like that occur?
I think like I do love animals. I've got a little dog that comes with me everywhere. But I think it's just that as well I'm really interested in, and I think my work necessarily doesn't scream and shout that it's about focused about nature because of like the colours they use and shape, but I think that's like a way of me kind of tapping into that interest.
Sorry. Could each of you share the names of the artists that inspire you and your practice?
Why don't you first?
Okay, where to begin? I think we both share a real love for Matisse and his collages. I won't speak for you, Alice, but there's something very stunning about his simplicity, his color, his vibrancy, his optimism, his playfulness, all of that. Definitely Matisse. I'm a big fan of Alexander Calder. He does because of his mobiles, and I love the three-dimensional color shapes moving. I do like Diepenkorn, again, cityscapes, landscape, but with shaped color, I'd say would be quite striking. And then a flood of others, but yes, go for it, Alice. I think those would be the three that for this series.
See, I think I think, like Rachel said, I'm a big Matisse fan of his cutouts, how he like physically creates these complex works through simple shapes. I then say I'd also very into Miro for his kind of, and his like how he uses his visual language. Keith Haring is a huge influence in my work for that like pop work and his characters and how he creates movement in his works through a kind of graphic way. And then I would also look at Mike Kelly and Annette Messenger, and they both looked at childhood, but I think the one thing that I didn't say is a lot of the works have underlying has underlying messages, and the one thing that inspires me about Annette Messenger and Mike Kelly is how their works is about childhood but has lots of underlining messages, tapping into the darker side of stuff that's not so jolly. Drives us as artists. Yeah. Well, I think what drives me as an artist is that I would say it's a way of me expressing myself, finding that, you know, because of like my dyslexia, I think that's the one thing things have to keep moving, is very focused on my practice as like the process of my practice. And I think the thing that inspires me is that it's my way of expressing what I'm thinking, because everything else is very difficult. So I think the thing for me is that excitement of how I can communicate to the audience.
Yes, and do say
Rachel,
say if I'm glitching again, won't you? Put your hand up if I'm glitching. I think I think it is just something that is innate. I think it is from childhood. It was wax crayons all the time, and then felt tips, and it's still felt tips. I think it's something that I see something and want to put it down. I think whatever, even if it's in the sand, watching something, seeing something, there is something that triggers of wanting, similarly, to express something, visualized and record it, and not necessarily words, but imagery. And that hasn't left me. I think it's one of those.
Yeah, I think
to help myself.
I just want to jump onto a moment how how you said you don't quite know what will inspire you, but like you can recently, like if you walk down the beach, I got inspired by seaweed, and I had to start using the shape of seaweed in my work. I think it's like that's also what is exciting. Sometimes you don't know what you're going to be inspired by until you see it, and I find that's also really exciting, being an artist.
And Rachel, I think sort of landscape and townscapes inspire you, don't they? Where you are, where you're walking, being present in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, throughout my career, it's very much the ordinary. I mean, bar maybe a trip to California, it is very, very finding beauty in the ordinary, just how we live, who we are, how do we represent that. And my new series is much more about just simple, the lines of life, the roof, the cables, the sky, and just what we see, who we are. And I never intend to yes, exactly that. I don't think, right, this is what shall I do for my new series, it's going to be this. It's kind of like, what have I gathered, what have I been looking at, what is in my book, and then it gains momentum.
Yeah, I think we'll just have one more question. There was a question from Milo. What's next? What's next, Alice?
What's next in practice, in our practices?
Yeah.
So I think what's next, I think like in my practice, I really want to go back to explore some etching. I want to kind of, because I've been focusing on just drawings. I haven't been printing as much recently, and I've been creating loads and loads of drawings. So I think I want to translate some of those into new etchings, and I think they will be quite different to the recent etchings I've done that you'll have seen, because the drawings are using the more recent imagery I've been using. And I think I also want to explore using kind of different marks. I went through a phase of exploring mark, and I want to go back and bring more mark, less, because some of the prints can appear quite flat. So I think I want to explore more mark again.
Thank you. And Rachel?
Yes, just as I was saying, I think I've got another, I've spent a year drawing a lot of very local rooftops and skies, and as I've said, and I may be called something like Between the Lines, just what is going on with each other's lives, behind the scenes, behind doors, but also looking up what lies between us, with the parks, the trees, the skies. There's landscape linked with man-made structures, and I'm using collage more, cutting up my work a bit more, and but still using lithography. That's hopefully what's coming up.
Well, thank you very, very much, and thank you for the questions, everyone. I think we'll draw that to a close now, and thank you both very much.